if you believe the corporate press, Christian nationalism, not only just Christian nationalism, but white Christian nationalism is perhaps the most dangerous threat facing America today.
You think it's part of the Christian nationalism, this rise in violent Christian nationalism that we have seen, which is also disturbing because they find it to be, they use biblical principles, they pervert them to justify this, which is another problem, particularly in Texas. This is a growing movement. It's God, guns, and Trump.
But is it really? Is this just another buzz phrase that is being used to drum up political points on a particular side of the aisle? Or is this a philosophy, a concept with merit that should be evaluated and rejected by sane people? Well, I initially tackled this topic not too long ago, maybe a few months after the posting of this video, and my initial assumption about Christian nationalism was very simple. It's a left-wing lie. It's a term cooked up by left-wing academics to demonize Christians who get involved in politics. And while I still largely believe that, I think there's more nuance that can be added. And in the wake of Marjorie Taylor Greene's forthcoming book, The Case for Christian Nationalism, which was ghostwritten by Milo Yiannopoulos and was leaked, by the way, which has caused a lot of controversy, different topic, different day, a lot of people have been talking about this topic once more. So we have to really try to ask ourselves, what is Christian nationalism? We have reached the first problem with this entire term. As I mentioned before, Christian nationalism is so ill-defined, and it is so differently defined depending on who you believe and depending on what you believe, that it is an unreliable term to use as to refer to an ideology. Now, when I did research for this video, I tried to say, you know what, it's not sufficient to say the term is not defined, because in our post-truth era, the definitions of things don't really matter. What the emotion they evoke within you, that's what matters, and a lot of people understand that. Of course, definitions still matter, but as it relates to swaying the masses, oh no. Emotion and passion is what is tapped into to bring forth particular actions, which is why leftism is so dangerous, because leftism substitutes emotion and passion, or substitutes reason for emotion and passion, So the most authoritative source on the left of left-wing academics, a book called Taking America Back for God by Andrew Whitehead and Mr. Samuel Perry, they define Christian nationalism in the following way. They say, simply put, Christian nationalism is a cultural framework, a collection of myths, traditions, symbols, narratives, and value systems that idealizes and advocates a fusion of Christianity with American civic life. But the Christianity of Christian nationalism is of a particular sort. We do not mean Christianity here as a general meta-category, including all expressions of Orthodox Christian theology, nor will we use such terms as evangelicalism or white conservative Protestantism as synonyms for Christian nationalism. On the contrary, the Christianity of Christian nationalism represents something more than religion. As we will show, it includes assumptions of nativism, white supremacy, patriarchy, heteronormativity, along with divine sanction for authoritarian control and militarism. They go on to say, in this very convoluted and crazy definition, it is as ethnic and political as it is religious. Christian nationalism, Christian, reflecting this fuller, more nuanced sense of the word, contends that America has been and always should be distinctively Christian. Okay, what does any of that mean, right? Someone who studied philosophy like me understands what that means. But a lot of people who are trying to find out the truth, that is hidden behind so much academic jargon language. What they're basically saying is that if you support particular ideas, like white supremacy or nativism, or the patriarchy, or whatever idea they don't like, and you happen to be a Christian, and you may have your faith influence your support of those ideas, that's Christian nationalism. But they didn't even get to the nationalism part yet. So that definition is not very helpful. But then when you go over to the right, one of the most foremost theologians and apologists on the right, Dr. Vadi Bakum, who I actually respect a lot, he had this to say about Christian nationalism.
You just stop and think about it for a minute, right? Okay, if you don't want Christian nationalism, what other kind of nationalism do you want?
Yeah.
Right? Do you want, secular nationalism, Muslim nationalism, or if it's not the Christianity that's the problem, is it the nationalism that's the problem? If we don't want nationalism, what do we want? Do we want globalism? No, thank you, please.
Right.
So
with China in charge.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it does sound like a bunch of scary Christian nationalism, and so what?
You're right.
Yeah.
Christians are the only ones who are told to check their worldview at the door.
Yeah.
Okay. I found that explanation also not to be satisfactory. And I say this as someone who actually generally appreciates the work that Dr. Backham does, and I generally appreciate the impact it has on our culture, but that was not satisfactory, because all he did was dismiss it and then say, well, what about other kind of nationalism? What about globalism? And he created this false dichotomy between Christian nationalism or secular globalism, which doesn't fully reflect the matter at hand. We cannot reason by means of dichotomies. We should always understand there could be an in-between answer that could help us get to the truth. So, here's what I think this conversation needs. It needs, like all good conversations, to define its terms. Truth is not found in obscurity. Truth is found in plain-spokenness and integrity, which many people on the left don't have today, and some folks on the right don't have it either, but especially not on the left. So, I'll give you guys a few ideas of how to tackle this term. When Marjorie Taylor Greene says Christian nationalism,
perhaps not call yourself a Christian nationalist, knowing that that's what that means.
I don't know anything bad about Christian
Who gets to say what words mean?
I'm asking her. Well, I mean, the
what I'm
definition.
saying is I don't know who labeled that something bad.
she does not mean a particular ideology. She thinks of it like, I'm a Christian and I'm a nationalist, therefore I'm a Christian nationalist. That's one way of thinking about the term. It's not rigorous. It's not really an ideology. It's just you being a Christian and you being a nationalist, which are two distinct things, and those things coinciding within you. Okay, that's one thing. Some people who call themselves Christian nationalists may very well want to make America a Christian nation, and they want to do so in a way that gives more validity and credence to the idea of the nation state as more than a government, as more than simply an institution that protects society, but rather an all-encompassing force of life. This is what a lot of nationalist movements have done throughout history. I'll get to that in a second. So that's one way. And then there may simply be people who actually believe that society needs to be structured and ordered according to biblical ethics, and that government, educational institutions, and other social institutions must be compelled by law to structure society by biblical viewpoints, by biblical law, particularly Old Testament biblical law. Now, out of these three categories, the Marjorie Taylor Greenes, the people who have a sense of nationalism and want to see a Christian ethic reflected, and the people who want to restructure society in the name of Christianity, or rather a particular version of Christianity, I think the term Christian nationalism, it can only be aptly applied to the third category. Because as I said, Marjorie Taylor Greene is not reflecting an ideology. She's simply reflecting upon 2 points in her identity that she happens to hold dear. The second group of people are more so, taking in the idea as an emotional and emotive feeling as opposed to having a structured system. Whereas the third group not only has a structured system, they want to force their structured system upon you. And that is why that's bad. But the discussion of Christian nationalism actually excludes conversation about this group. In fact, in that book that I just showed you guys, these authors say, we're not talking about the people who actually want to embed biblical law into secular law and impose it upon all of you. They don't matter. They're not Christian nationalists. And this is where the conversation gets skewed. Because when you don't have a clear definition of a particular ideology or a particular thing, and then you try to make that a basis, a cause celebre for your political commentary, as The View and other pundits have, you will continue to miss the mark. And so many people in America are missing the mark. But it is my prayer to the Lord that after you watch this video, you will not miss the mark. You will understand exactly what it means to be a Christian nationalist properly understood. Now, the third idea I just mentioned is termed Reconstructionism. It's oftentimes called biblical Reconstructionism. And Reconstructionism is defined as a theology that arose out of conservative Presbyterianism, which proposes that contemporary application of laws of Old Testament Israel, or the biblical law, is the basis for reconstructing society towards the kingdom of God on earth. This ideology posits that society needs to be governed by Old Testament law, and secular institutions should apply that Old Testament law to society regardless. This would mean, for example, there's a few examples of this. This would mean capital punishment for certain kinds of behaviors, such as homosexuality, lying, and things of that sort. The Reconstructionists have a very particular reading of Christianity, which they use to justify their underlying political positions. And so a Reconstructionist theologian called David Chilton, according to a book called Eyes Right, which really explains Reconstructionism quite well, he succinctly describes the view of the Reconstructionist. He says, the Christian goal for the world is the universal development of biblical theocratic republics in which every area of life is redeemed and placed under the lordship of Jesus Christ and the rule of God's law. Not the rule of law, not the rule of secular law, the rule of God's law. So this idea of a nation, which is simply a common stock of people that share a certain kind of heritage. In America, all Americans share an intellectual heritage, which go back all the way to the Declaration of Independence, the Founding Fathers, the discussions about natural law and the Enlightenment. We all share that. No matter where you come from, if you are an American, that is your heritage. Your heritage is in values, in ideas, in spiritual concepts, not in physical concepts. You see, some nations value ethnicity. Some nations value lineage. So what's in your blood? Who was your grandfather? Who was your grandmother? America was one of the first nations to reject all of that as superficial and not the proper basis of political calculation. America was the first nation to say, no. Our values lie in the universal. Our values lie in the underlying tenets of what it means to be a human being, that we as people, creatures of reason, have the ability to discover and implement on a social level. And then we're going to go a little bit further than that. We're going to take what we discovered out there in nature that helps us and feeds us to live good and flourishing lives, and we're going to apply it to an ethic about how government is to be run. So we're going to take these objective rules and then apply it to government and constrain government with those rules. That's how you get the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. That's how you get America's beautiful tradition of liberty. That's precisely how you get it. Now, the Reconstructionist viewpoint is essentially one of theocracy, but it's a particular kind of theocracy, which does not, again, account for any viewpoint diversity. It does not account for individual rights or individual liberties. It is an idea that puts submission and subservience to a legalistic reading over anything else. Now, if the idea of the nation, which is the common heritage of people that live in a particular place and time in a particular location, which basically is a nation, is couched in this higher duty towards Old Testament law, then you would have, in a sense, a version of Christian nationalism. Well, I guess in order to say this, I have to then therefore define what nationalism is. Nationalism is an idea that really came out of revolutionary France, which basically, at its base level, was an assertion of a nation's right to be sovereign and independent from external forces and influences over those forces and influences. At its base level, that's nationalism. Nationalism is simply asserting the fact that nations, in order to exist in any coherent capacity, must be whole. They must be self-contained. They cannot be splintered between what people in this area want and what people in an area that's outside of the nation's parameters want. And here's really the basis for this kind of nationalism is actually quite profound. Think about this. As a human being, you are a finite being. You are someone who is limited in what you can do, or how you can do it. You have an energy pool that can be depleted quite quickly. And when that energy pool is depleted, you literally cannot do anything. Well, if we understand the world through both distinctions and limitations, the principle of limitations, then we have to also understand that human societies cannot work unless there are limitations as well, which is why a proper conception of individual rights will put an emphasis on the government to protect those rights, and also an emphasis on people to refrain from doing certain things to you, cheating, killing, things like that, things that would defy and destroy you. And limitations is the basis of a good society. But then we have to go upwards and say, okay, society, human beings are limited, and from human beings we get society, but then from society we get the nation, and so therefore the nation has to also be limited, which is why it exists in a particular place and time and space with borders around it. Borders are basically the principal limitations manifest physically. So if we understand that this is a necessary principle for life in general, limitations, the nationalism in this sense is intuitive, necessary, and in another sense is virtuous. It's an intellectual virtue because we understand there is a virtue in understanding the necessity of concepts and then applying that to your life. Aristotle fans like me very much now. But there's also a different form of nationalism. This is the form of nationalism embodied throughout movements in the 20th century that really focus on a collective identity that eliminates the individual, eliminates universal principles, and places stock solely in racial makeup or other kind of superficial characteristics. So, for example, we see a certain kind of nationalism in Mussolini's Italy or Nazi Germany, both fascist regimes in which Mussolini's Italy, according to the Doctrine of Fascism written by Giovanni Gentili, quite literally did not believe that the individual existed. Mussolini's Italy believed that the individual was merely a part of an organism that they called the nation, and the nation literally encompasses all life. So if you are a nationalist in the fascist sense or in the collectivist sense, then that means you believe that the nation is everything. Nothing is beyond the nation. So in a sense, this kind of nationalism doesn't respect the limitations of the nation, which reflect the limitations of life that we all need to understand to live well, but instead it's this abstract theory that is basically a tribute to superficial characteristics that don't actually matter. Am I flowing now or am I not flowing? I'm trying to get you guys to understand that the collectivist nationalism of the 20th century is a perversion of what nationalism actually is. And I believe what nationalism actually has been emphasized by the MTGs, by President Trump when he went to NATO courageously and said, you will not rip off American citizens anymore. You will pay up. We will not be funding your social welfare programs, which Europe has, and apparently they work so well. They only work so well because the European nations are not funding their own defense systems. That's why they work so well. And that's a pet peeve of mine. People say, oh, well, Europe has all this welfare. It works so well. No, it does not. They're on welfare. Europe is essentially on welfare provided by America by means of NATO, the UN, and other forces. Different topic for a different day. Calm down, Christian. Point is this. Nationalism, when it's understood, asserts sovereignty. All nations need sovereignty to exist, or else they cease to exist, and they become serfs, not fully independent, constituted nations. So, at this point in the video, we have to really ask ourselves, since Christian nationalism, as defined by the left, is so opaque and is really meant to fit particular ideas they don't like whatever patriarchy, white supremacy, whatever idea they don't like, even nativism, which they may even call what I call nationalism, nativism, since we've determined that this is this general leftist idea of Christian nationalism is a catch-all term for a particular political purpose, and we've now determined that there's actually people in this world that want to constitute society on the basis of theocratic authoritarianism. They're not a very big portion of people, but they exist. Can we finally put this beast to rest? Can we finally say, yes, there are people that actually exist out there who don't respect the ethics of a free society, who don't respect the necessity of a flourishing society, which is going to be interpersonal relationships that happen in a voluntary context, who don't respect the beliefs of other people that we in America, as a society of cultural pluralism, have become to not only respect but love. There are people, and those people exist, but they are not this boogeyman that threatens to undermine the republic. The republic will be undermined by the very people claiming to save it, by the people in academia and the corporate press who suck from the teat of the people in academia and then take these odd concepts, these ill-defined concepts like Christian nationalism, and then try to impose them on an entire body politic. It is disgusting, it is despicable, and it is an example of propaganda at work. Read philosophy, study philosophy, understand these things. You don't have to have a PhD. You don't have to be someone in the ivory tower or whatever. But read and study these things, because if you understand the light of truth, darkness shall not prevail against you. My friends, I love you guys so much. If you love me, like this video, subscribe to this channel, share this video, comment on this video. Help me get my message out there. If you want to support me, I have a Patreon. I have a Locals, christianlocals.locals.com. I also have a PayPal, which is going to be in the comment section down below. Anything you give to support me financially will go to making the same kind of content, even better kinds of content that you see on this channel and that you just witnessed. I love you guys so much, and you better stay pensive. Bye, guys.